All right, let's settle this once and for all. Is debt good or is debt bad? Some say debt is always bad and you should avoid it at all costs. Others say you should load up on debt to get rich. So which one is it? Well, today I'm going to break it all down back here on this whiteboard behind me. And by the end, you're going to have a very clear answer how to use debt the right way. But first, let's talk about two of the most famous financial experts out there with two completely opposite views on debt. Okay. And you probably know who I'm talking about. Dave Ramsey and Robert Kiyosaki. Let's start with Dave first. All right. His message is this: debt is bad. All debt is bad. All right. His advice is if you have any debt, then you should cut up your credit cards. You should live on rice and beans. You should sell everything you own. You should work nonstop until debt is gone. Well, back when I got out of dental school, I followed his philosophy. In my mind, it was ingrained all debt was bad. Do everything that you can to get out of it. I didn't have any debt up until dental school. Then once I had dental school, I had all this debt, $300,000 of debt. We bought his house. It was just such a tremendous burden on me. Like I was suffocating that as soon as I started making money, I was just like, it was so uncomfortable. Plus I had this guy in the back of my head saying, get out of debt. All debt is bad. Get out of debt. So that's why I started following. Okay. You've probably heard of one of his famous quotes is when people call in and they ask these different questions and he says, look, you're broke. There's no vacations. There's no eating out. There's no fun. Just get to work. Okay. So that's what I started off probably the first half to 60% of my career going down that path. All right. So here's the thing. His advice isn't totally wrong. If you're in a situation right now and you're drowning in, let's say, high interest credit card debt, yes, you do need to fix that and fix it fast. But here's the problem. This method actually ignores the difference between there's good debt and there's bad debt. And that's where Robert Kiyosaki comes into place. Okay. Author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He's more on the load up on debt approach. He's the total opposite of Dave. All right. So he says debt is a secret weapon to wealth. He says the rich use debt to get richer. And he's always touting that he has like over $1 billion in debt, which I don't know if that's true or not. And he loves it. So for him, he says debt equals wealth versus Ramsey, debt is bad. Okay. But here's the thing. When you start listening to Kiyosaki a little bit closer, he actually says, he talks about bad debt. And he says bad debt is consumer debt like credit cards, car loans, vacations on borrowed money. And then on good debt, on the other hand, this is debt that actually makes you money, like a loan on an investment property that actually is going to generate cash flow for you. All right. So let's break that down a little bit. So we can put bad debt right here, and then we'll put good debt. All right. So let's break this down. So let's start off with the bad debt. Remember we said if you have like credit cards, if you have car loans, if you finance your vacations, shopping sprees, things like that. On the other hand, good debt, rental property, right? And then maybe business loans. If you're going to take out a loan for your dental practice, medical practice, something like that. If you want to take out loans for investments, that sort of thing, that's what he's characterizing as good debt. Now, on paper or on a whiteboard, as you can see, this pretty much makes sense. But here's where I actually disagree with both of them. All right. So here's the truth about debt, sort of from the Jeff perspective. All right. I think of it like a farmer. Let's say a farmer's out in his fields planting seeds. Okay. A farmer needs capital to grow crops. Okay. He really needs seeds to grow crops. But I'm trying to use this story for you. So if you have a farmer that needs capital to grow crops, he might go and borrow money. He may go buy seeds. He may go buy fertilizer and equipment. Okay. He needs capital. He needs money to go out and plant his fields. Okay. Again, he needs to go and borrow money to buy the things that help him get his field ready. The equipment, the seeds, the fertilizer. That's a risk. But if he plants the right crops in the right season with the right conditions in place, guess what's going to happen to his harvest? It's going to be worth way more than what he initially borrowed. Okay. But what happens if he actually borrows too much and then maybe he doesn't plan for a drought? He could lose everything, right? So you see, the problem isn't the debt itself, it's how you manage it. So before you take on any debt, based on that little story I just gave you, here's 3 things that I want you to ask yourself. Number 1, am I planting the right seeds? Right seeds meaning am I using my debt for good investments like real estate, other businesses, education, things like that, okay? Number 2, am I planning or am I prepared? Let's say that. Am I prepared for bad weather? So what is that? So that's kind of like, do I have a backup plan? Things go wrong, because things can always go wrong. And then number 3, how long is it going to be until I harvest? Which kind of means, is the debt worth it for long-term returns? Okay. So that's why I always say debt is always a burden, but sometimes it could be worth carrying. But it's always going to be a burden. And the Bible says that the borrower is a slave to the lender. It's a burden, but again, sometimes it's worth actually carrying it for future results. You should only take on debt if you know that you can grow from it. And then if you plant the wrong seeds, or if you borrow without a plan, you're setting yourself up for failure. So just don't blindly avoid debt like Dave, and don't just take on massive risk like Kiyosaki. Instead, think about that smart farmer we just talked about. Only plant what you can grow. All right. So think of it like this. Debt is the seeds. Okay. So debt equals the seeds, and only plant what you can grow. So I think if you think about it like that, you'll be much smarter making a decision whether or not you should take out debt for something or not. All right, so now let's talk about when to use debt the right way to do that. All right, so we're going to look at debt and we're going to look at investments. Here's my simple rule of how to use it, okay, the right way. If the debt's interest rate is lower than what you expect to make, it might be worth it. If the debt's interest rate is high, if you have a high interest rate right now, pay it off as soon as possible. Okay. Let's use a couple examples. Let's say you have $5,000. Okay. You got $5,000 in debt. You can either pay down your mortgage at 3% or invest it in earning 8%. Okay. Let's say you have that left on your mortgage. Okay. $5,000 left. So again, you can either pay down that at a 3%, or you can invest it in earning 8%. I'd personally invest it because pretty easy to see. 8% is quite a lot bigger than 3%. Let's take a look at something else. High interest debt. What if that mortgage, instead of being 3%, what if it was 7%? Then I would pay off that debt, because a guaranteed 7% return is better than a potential 8% return. Does that make sense? All right. So here's what you should take away from all this. Number 1, don't blindly avoid all debt like Dave Ramsey. And number 2, don't blindly take on massive debt like Robert Kiyosaki. Instead, think about debt as a tool. Treat it like a tool. If it's low risk, high reward, use it wisely. I didn't say to always do it, but use it wisely. If it's high risk, low reward, avoid it. Okay. Remember, debt is nothing more than a tool. So use it wisely. And then if all of this interests you and you want to think about using debt for different investments, and you want a simple step-by-step plan to not only use good debt, but to build wealth, do yourself a favor, watch this next video.